What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco. Trigger warning for electoral politics. Project 2025 is the 900-page plan drafted by the Heritage Foundation and other right-wing think tanks to shed the government in the U.S. of liberals and the laws meant to protect marginalized people. Project 2025 has become a sort of brand name in politics, but these right-wing plans to overhaul politics are not new. And in San Francisco, the successful recall elections for District Attorney SFUSD and the SFUSD Public School Board a couple of years back are examples. In the case of the school board, you even had the mayor, London Breed, appointing right-wing allies like Ann Sue, who almost immediately started her own private school after assuming a role on the public school board. And Sue replaced Alison Collins and two others. And Ali and I talked about that experience and the local Project 2025 on a Friday night. After she finished a week in the classroom, she's still teaching. Thank you to August and Gay13 for becoming members of the Patreon, which you can also do at patreon.com/SadFrancisco. All of our past episodes are there, and we have another bonus episode up there where we answered some questions from people who listen to the podcast. Please become a member if you want us to keep bringing you local journalism and interviews with people who care about making sure that the Bay Area doesn't become a place where right-wing characters get to decide what kids get to learn in school. Here is Alison Collins. So I have Alison Collins here. Very excited to have you on. We've been talking about doing this for a while. Ali is locally known. You're a bit famous here locally in San Francisco for people who are listening outside of the Bay. Ali was unfortunately the target of an extreme right-wing campaign that attacked the school board here at the SF Unified just a few years back. And they actually recalled the school board, Ali included, and replaced it with a much more conservative-minded school board. Ishmael Reed even wrote a play based on the debacle, which I just learned about. I mean, it was that dramatic. So if you weren't in San Francisco during that time, it was something that the whole city was talking about. It's also, I think, relevant absolutely beyond the city limits, because this is a model. This recall model is something that people are using outside of the Bay. But I will stop there and let Ali, introduce yourself.
Well, I appreciate it. I really enjoy the podcast, so I feel very honored.
Thanks.
To be able to talk with you. And I feel like we've been in conversation, even though it hasn't been direct, in social media spaces. You know, there's a group of us who've been following, I think, the last 4 years since COVID, political shifts in the Bay Area, but specifically San Francisco, starting with recalls for SFUSD and also the school board, and how those specific kind of personal attacks were mechanisms for transforming the political landscape in San Francisco specifically. And I think a lot of people don't, if you're not from San Francisco, people still think San Francisco is progressive. And I moved to San Francisco in 96, became an educator, and it was a very different city. It was much more diverse. I became a teacher, taught at Galileo High School. My student body was really mixed. I had Latino students, Black students, Asian American immigrant students. A lot of them were from Chinatown, low income, and then white students. And it was wonderful. And I started teaching at a time when Tom Amiano had been on the school board as an educator promoting LGBTQ rights. So it was really wonderful too, because as a teacher, we felt safe teaching and creating environments that were inclusive and supportive for all students. I never worried. My students did presentations on homophobia, with other students. Not that anything was perfect, but that as an educator, you felt really supported by the district at a time when in the 90s, in some parts of the country, teachers were getting fired just for being gay. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And so we have a real sense of pride in San Francisco. And we really pioneered a lot of progressive educational, when you talk about inclusive schools, LGBTQ affirming school practices were pioneered in San Francisco. Additionally, ethnic studies, which came out of San Francisco State, there were educators working with educators at San Francisco State to implement this college level curriculum in high schools and developing and expanding ethnic studies so that all students could learn their history, right? Which is a wonderful thing. Black, Latinx, Asian American students learning about their contributions to American history in a city that was founded by Chinese Americans, Latinx. It was owned by Mexico, right? It was a formerly Mexican territory. And then also as a port city, a lot of Black Americans moved to San Francisco to make it a great city. And so just as an educator, it was just such a wonderful thing to be a part of. So when I eventually became a member of the school board, I was elected with an overwhelming, I got the most votes on a shoestring campaign. I was a parent organizer, and it was at a time when Trump was in office. And I think a lot of people nationally were saying, hey, we need to change this. We need to, get involved. And I think nationally there was a wave of us who were not traditional politicians, but really believed in the promise of America and were not happy with what was happening in the country. And within 2 years, when COVID hit, and there was also George Floyd protests, we saw a huge backlash. There was this opportunity for a backlash movement, which now I think is more visible with Project 2025. But in 2020 and 21, I think it caught me off guard, it caught a lot of people off guard. And I think it took me a while, but I think even nationally, people a while to figure out what was happening. It's like hindsight. When you're being targeted by these covert, this isn't just people are mad and expressing their views. There's actually it's like information warfare and political targeting. It's highly coordinated, highly funded attacks against people in leadership to remove them from office. That's what I've been witnessing. And you don't know exactly who's targeting you until after it's happened.
That's why, I think Project 2025, as people have come to find out more, is like a very deliberate, attempt to replace so many people in government, at school boards, for example, with, people with very conservative values that don't align with, I would say, the majority of people in the US.
The majority of Americans, not just San Francisco.
Right. And so, the deliberate attempts, like when you talk about this, because it is, it does sound conspiratorial. We've talked about this, how when you bring up that this is a concerted effort to replace whatever, public servants, whatever you want to call the targets of these plans, it can sound conspiratorial, but I think with things like Project 2025, it's pretty clear that this is happening, this is real, and it, in fact, a precursor of Project 2025 sort of happened to you. Mm-hmm. You've talked a little bit about this, but what did you learn about how this right-wing recall machine works? What are some of their strategies and tactics?
So Steve Bannon, right? He's a political strategist. He was for the Trump administration in 2020, early 2020. He said the path to save the nation is simple. It's going to go through the school boards. And they're serious, right? I think a lot of us on the left are used to hearing so much wackadoodle kind of stuff that you just get used to just disregarding it because it sounds just crazy, right? But there was definitely a concerted plan. Him and then also Chris Rufo, who he's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He's the one that crafted this whole anti-CRT woke agenda and then the trans panic. And he was actually also working in during COVID. And what they realized was that white women fuel elections. And where white suburban women vote is how you win campaigns. And so COVID provided an opportunity for folks to fearmonger. And if you trace it back, what you see is there were initially a lot of these kind of explosions of these little school board conflicts happening. Parents were showing up with this anti-masker stuff. And it was really surprising because initially, and it even happened in San Francisco, most people were happy that school districts were trying to keep kids safe. And people weren't really arguing about whether we should mask or things like that. And then all of a sudden, this is where it becomes this is a pattern, right? Where you have these random moms all of a sudden showing up at school boards, screaming about masks and how it's like really bad for kids, right? There's no research that shows that masking is bad, dangerous health-wise or anything. Yeah. And then a spate also of moms that were screaming about, schools not being open. And we all had different opinions. So, and school boards, if you're a good school board commissioner, you want to value everybody's opinion, even if you don't agree with it. But I think what people were unprepared for was that a lot of the women that were showing up in these school board races were actually not parents. Maybe their kids weren't in school. And that happened in San Francisco. One of the parents started a group called Decreasing the Distance, did not literally have children in school, but became an organizer for parents to protest school closures. Yeah. And additionally, another woman by the name of Jennifer Say also was this really strong proponent against masks and safety measures. And she was a brand manager for Levi Strauss. So these women are not just moms, right? Like even me, somebody who's on the school board with a lot of, I have a master's in education, I don't have the ability to get an op-ed in the New York Times. And women like this were getting op-eds nationally about a local issue. And so all of a sudden, as a school board member, you're like, what is going on? Why is the New York Times running 5 articles about San Francisco, a relatively small school district that only has 800,000 kids? Like, it's not LA, it's not New York. So then you find out years later that Jennifer Say is also one of the moms for DeSantis. And she's working with this organization called the Independent Women's Forum, and people should look it up. They basically get people elected. And the Independent Women's Forum is a dark money organization, just like the Manhattan Institute. And they started as Women for Clarence Thomas when they were trying to confirm his nomination, and they needed women to do that. So you say like it's really dramatic locally. I would say it is dramatic nationally because it's all political theater. It's not real, right? And so there are moms that are mad about books. They're everywhere. We don't always agree. But these moms are driving a political narrative that was crafted by people like Steve Bannon and Chris Rufo and the Heritage Foundation. They get talking points, they do media analysis, and it's also connected to social media companies like Elon Musk with Twitter and Zuckerberg. They monitor our conversation. So they know what things are trending. And so they can evaluate what political messaging is hitting its mark and what's not. And so there is a national coordination. And as you said, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but with the publishing of Project 2025, it's actually not a conspiracy. It's in writing. They want to remove public servants who don't align with their political values and replace them with political operatives. Yeah. And in all forms of government. But education it's very easy to mobilize people's emotions when it comes to their kids.
Yeah. And I think, in San Francisco specifically, this is a whole other episode, but thinking about when I learned about all of the tech money that was going into some of the private K-12 schools in San Francisco, where tuition is like, $30K a year or more, and wanting to advance this idea of for-profit education to sort of muscle out public education in the Bay. I mean, that was a wake-up call. There's like a school that was started by somebody who was an early employee at Twitter. I'll put an article in the show notes about that.
That would be great.
But like you said, they're kind of acting as PR agents, these moms who may or may not be moms, first of all, but also the point is they're being instrumentalized by the right wing, by people like Steve Bannon, and in places that, the public perception of a place like San Francisco is that we are a more progressive, center. Why do you think that the right wing focuses on a place like San Francisco?
Well, I think we were a test case, and what I realized was there's a lot of activity happening nationally. As people know, there's like the Don't Say Gay stuff that was going on in Florida. There's stuff happening in Texas. But San Francisco and also Northern Virginia, which I don't know much about, to be honest, but it kept coming up. People said, gosh, this sounds so similar to what's happening in Northern Virginia, like Loudoun County, Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, these wealthy suburban towns that are just outside of DC, but they tend to vote very progressive, and they tend to run, support really progressive education policy. And what we saw was that there was another woman by the name of Azra Nomani, who is a former journalist and former Trumper. She's an emeritus member of the Independent Women's Forum. She was the mom that was showing up in Northern Virginia screaming about woke indoctrination and also masking. But she was also promoting the local recallers in San Francisco. So if you saw her talking about what was happening in San Francisco, and she even amplified through her journalistic talents, she was amplifying these parents that were fighting to kind of reopen schools, when in reality, the parents in San Francisco weren't even sending their children to public schools, right?
Yeah.
So it's another example of kind of like these two people move here, and 2 months later, they're filing a recall about how their children are being harmed, when two of them are parents. One of them, like, they don't even go to this school district. So again, that's where you start to see this coordination. And what I realized is that, I mean, it's always after the fact. I was kind of looking for information about this woman who had been targeting me that I didn't even know about, right? She's talking about me in Virginia, right? And so friends of mine in Virginia were like, yeah, we heard about San Francisco through her. And then I saw, a video of her talking to Mike Johnson. They were running hearings in 2022, and she was just a mom, they're calling us terrorists, and, we're just trying to defend our kids from woke indoctrination. She's complaining about critical race theory in children's books, and she holds up a picture of me, right? I'm thinking, what? Right? A photo of me saying, yeah, parents in San Francisco, even liberals don't like this stuff, kind of thing. And so that's when I realized, obviously it's not about me. This is a narrative, and I'm this character in this narrative. And so as a Black woman, there's a trope, Black women are supposedly aggressive. All we do is talk about race, use the race card. And then also this idea that we're unqualified, even though the two of us, Gabriela Lopez and me, were both hold masters in education, and we're teachers, and we were the ones that were removed, right? But additionally, this idea that I realized San Francisco is in itself a dog whistle for other parts of the country because of the LGBTQ, like it's a safe place for LGBTQ people. And so if you're in Arkansas, you say in San Francisco, right away, there's some negative perceptions among people who are bigoted against
Hmm.
gay people or the trans community. And so Chris Rufo is running around telling everybody that we're like conducting sex changes on kids without anybody telling the parents. Like,
Right.
that's not true. But it flies in Arkansas. And because they don't have any connectivity, there's no way for them to check, like, is that really happening? And so what I realized is it's almost like kind of like a high school. You find out somebody's been spreading rumors about you. You didn't know it, but all of a sudden, like, it's like a week goes by and you realize people have been talking about you. You didn't even know what was happening. And that's kind of why I think San Francisco and Northern Virginia were targeted, because they were seen as liberal places or liberal elites. And then they can sell a narrative in non-liberal places about the dangers of DEI or the dangers of trans affirming education.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, keyword is like narrative. They're narrativizing this idea that, that, using these symbols, including yourself.
Yeah.
And, the idea of San Francisco's ultra left-wing reputation to not only like advertise the policies that they want to other places, maybe Arkansas, like you said, but also at least San Francisco, and I suspect, near DC, Northern Virginia, we both do, like, we are exporters of policy. Like, some of the things that happen in San Francisco, inevitably, you're going to find them in other cities. That's the way that, San Francisco has innovated a lot of things, and using that as like kind of like a villainous image is what they've been trying to do. Even if, like, we've talked about, it's not even necessarily true, especially like if you look at the local political machine in a lot of cases. We're not talking about people who are even like really left. To that end, like this is something that comes up again and again in the podcast, but another thing that I like to do from time to time for people who are listening from outside San Francisco is like help define for them what constitutes a moderate or centrist Democrat here in San Francisco.
Right.
Because the definition of that, I think, would be very, very different from what most people would expect it to be, not being in San Francisco. So for you, what does the moderate Democrat look like here in the Bay?
Well, I wouldn't even just say the Bay, because I think this is happening in New York with Eric Adams in a sense too. And I also, it's interesting, when I ran for office, I had the support of I was endorsed by almost all of the supervisors. I mean, so this also shows too, I'm not so radical, right? I was a mom who had a blog and got on the school board, and I was endorsed by a wide range of supervisors. And one Black supervisor or Black former supervisor told me, like, you're Black, you're not Democrat, or, you're not moderate or progressive, because the way that Black candidates are treated, there's anti-Blackness within all political spaces. And so, and I have a friend now in St. Louis. She's an educator and organizer. She's former Black Republican, but we are very much aligned in watching these narratives play out to target and using, Black people as like a boogeyman for political ends. And there are also Black politicians, as we've seen, that are used as tokens or as to diminish the voice. Black people they'll find a Black person to diminish the voice of Black people. Yeah. They'll find a gay person or a trans person to diminish the voice of trans activists. And so in San Francisco, you cannot run as a Republican. You cannot run. There are Republicans. And what's crazy is there are more Republican voters than there are Black people, right? So between 2016 and 2020, there was an increase in Trump voters. And yet, if you ran as a Republican, you would lose. So what we find is that Republicans run as Democrats, And this has been outed. I don't know if you talked about this. There are specific folks that have actually campaigned for Republicans, in their prior lives, but then come to San Francisco and then do like a makeover.
Right.
But even, and we even see this nationally, and even Clinton and Obama were in some degrees did this, anti-Black dog whistles work, and Democrats use them. And so Clinton talked about a super predator, which was highly toxic for Black people and Black communities. It demonizes all of us, right? Obama promoted charter schools, right? And he was favored a lot of neoliberal policies in education. He opened the door for charter schools. And I wanted him as president, but you have to acknowledge that. Eric Adams in New York is pro-police, and so is Mayor London Breed. They're leveraging, and Gavin Newsom, our governor, there are certain policies that I'm really happy that they're promoting, but they're leveraging a lot of the same talking points that are anti-immigrant, anti-homeless, so I've kind of stopped talking about parties, and I've also, even in San Francisco, stopped differentiating between moderates and progressives, because I see even, the progressives that have enacted anti-Black narratives to target their adversaries, right? On TikTok, there's this whole conversation. A lot of the Black content creators I watch, we're talking about the fact, like, you can't have liberation with anti-Blackness. But people have figured out that anti-Blackness does fuel in political engagement. And so it's an easy one. People kind of go to it.
Right.
Ableism, transphobia, these are things that they animate people, they get them active, and they get people to the polls. But it happens in all parties. All the parties are using these, and they shouldn't be. Ultimately, it won't be productive, but it may be beneficial for individual actors if they're seeking power.
Yeah, that is the bummer. And for people who, don't have all of the brain space to pay attention to what's happening in local politics, that can be dangerous, because then you do have people who are just making uninformed decisions, and these politicians or bad political actors, I guess you could call them, instrumentalizing. I kind of think of it as like sort of stealing the valor of people who have been more involved in liberatory work and, activists of the past, and using kind of the work that they've done and instrumentalizing it for things like white supremacy. And just really, the right wing push that we know is being made through, again, things like Project 2025.
Hello everyone, Tofu here again for another ad break. If you want to support the show directly, you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/SadFrancisco. There you'll find all of our past episodes and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Toshio and I just filmed episode 2, where we basically talked about how we try to ethically consume and produce content. Follow us again on all of our socials, and give us a rating or like on whatever audio platform or video platform you're listening to this on. We also just reached 50 Patreon subscribers, which is crazy to me. So I just want to personally thank all of you for helping me keep the lights on. And that's basically it. Ad read done, and now back to the episode.
So we did talk about Northern Virginia. Were there any other, examples that came up over like the past few years for you, where you saw this being instrumentalized, or you suspect it's going to be used?
Well, it's not suspect, because in Northern Virginia, there's a school called Thomas Jefferson High School. I started hearing about it because in San Francisco, there's a school called Lowell High School. And both of these schools function as magnets, although Lowell High School is technically a comprehensive high school, so it shouldn't have special rules. Thomas Jefferson High School is an application-based high school. It's highly coveted, and parents used to pay for their children to get test-taking skills so they could pass a test and gain entrance into this school. And these are relics of, or products of, desegregation. The public educators in the 80s started finding ways to maintain segregation under the guise of gifted education. And I don't want to disparage, there are gifted students, and, I think all students should be taught at the level that they need. So this isn't about whether there are gifted kids and they deserve those opportunities, but invariably a lot of these programs don't assess kids for giftedness. They just set up proxies for race, class, and parent education level. And so with COVID, we had to shift how we did enrollment because a lot of them were based on standardized tests, which basically are proxy for race, class, and parent education level. And that's when we saw basically, we made Lowell a lottery because it's not fair if a low-income kid doesn't have Wi-Fi, they don't get to go to school, for them to be penalized, in their choices for schools, right? So we implemented a lottery system. This also happened at Boston Latin which is the oldest kind of exam-based school in the country. And there were huge backlashes. And I think what we saw was all the alumni groups were mad that we had opened up access for all kids, because there are people who believe some people deserve the better schools with the more resources because their kids work harder. They're innately better. And this, you hear this with Chris
This
Rufo.
is a place. Yeah, no, Chris
Meritocracy
Rufo.
is all about like merit. It's not about working hard, really, because low-income kids work really hard, because they have so many barriers. It's about who has wealth and has already had resources and keeping the resources to themselves. So they all connected. And what we saw was that this local backlash in San Francisco, which has existed for a long time, was getting juice from Chris Rufo, from Ed Bloom, who is very heavily involved in the Federalist Society. There's another organization people should look up. It's a Koch donor network funded organization responsible for putting Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court and getting Clarence Thomas on there. Like, all of the conservative judges were put on there by the Federalist Society. And Ed Bloom knew that if he could create like a kind of a conflagration, if like a big upset, an outrage about acts, even white liberal parents, there's white liberal parents that they're not anti-racist when it comes to their kid going to a school and getting a spot, right? And so they basically united those two alumni groups and fueled their attacks on the school boards. And so what we found in San Francisco was right away, me and Gabriella received a letter from Harmeet Dillon, who is Trump's lawyer. She's a lawyer for Milo Yiannopoulos, Andy Ngo, all of these are conspiracy theorists, right? She represents them. She wrote us a letter threatening us, saying, if you continue with this, we're going to sue you, right? So right away, you see a connection to a woman who is she's the California chair for the Republican Party, right? Okay, that's a connection. And then these two groups that were filing lawsuits and supporting each other are also both connected to Moms for Liberty in Virginia. So the local group that was leading the cause against, leading the recall, filed their paperwork with a lawyer, a Virginia GOP lawyer by the name of Chris Marston. They were getting their mail in Virginia. So that's not a local group, right? And so both of them showed up with Ed Bloom on the steps of the Supreme Court when they were making the case to dismantle affirmative action. And because they had the justices there, they won. And so now what we're seeing is, like I said, like literally alumni from Lowell and alumni from people involved with a lot of the fights going on in Northern Virginia around Thomas Jefferson High School were literally speaking next to Ed Bloom, right? Promoting the disruption, the dismantling of affirmative action. And now the group that Ed Bloom is on the board of, Parents Defending Education, which is like a Moms for Liberty organization, they are now suing school districts across the country for any programs that support Black children. So they sent a letter to LA Unified saying, if you implement policies to support Black children, that's, quote, racist, and we're going to sue you. And so they're using this affirmative action ruling to dismantle civil rights protections and support, nationally, and I want to say not just in schools, they're using that decision to then target cities that are doing work around employment and housing.
Yeah.
So in San Francisco, there's an organization connected with Parents Defending Education who's suing Alameda County for a program to employ people of color. And they're also suing San Francisco for giving money to low-income trans and Black parents.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's not a conspiracy if they're doing it.
Right.
They're doing it, they've written about it, and they're not being shy about now bragging about it online.
And thank you for, like some of these connections, of
Yeah.
course, like not everyone will have all these connections. We'll put, there was a recent article in the Chronicle, I believe, about the, move away from offering very low income Black women and trans people some minor relief locally in San Francisco. We'll put that in the show notes. But I think, it's important to keep track of all of these organizations. Thank you for doing that work.
Can I talk about that really specifically? Because I want to say the organization that launched that attack is called Californians for Equal Rights, and they're based in San Diego. And they started out targeting the first Black superintendent.
I mean, you got to love that name. It's just,
yeah.
When they just,
so they're really good, aren't they?
Decide to use,
and they're like,
what's the opposite of what we're about to come in and do? And I think this is a place where, in particular, as an Asian American, you do see a lot of Asian Americans getting instrumentalized in the service of white supremacist causes. You don't even have to look, but you don't have to read between the lines with a lot of these people, though. Like, you have Diane Yap. Hate to, hear that name come out of my mouth, but she is someone who, I guess she went to Lowell.
She's a Lowell alumna, yes.
Yeah, and really, just straight up racist. You can check her out on Twitter if you dare. Yeah, and people have it's not hard to see. Again, you don't have to read between her tweets to see like the level, the like vociferous support for racist policies and just straight up racism that
can I say though, the racism though serves a function, and I think originally I didn't really see that. You think, oh, there's just racist people and they're just racist.
Right.
There are some racist people and they're just racist. Her function, she was paid by the Manhattan Institute as a policy analyst, and she was writing articles about how Black people were the ones who were targeting Asians, right? So when Asians said, we need rights, we need protection, we're being targeted, which is true, right?
This is like the anti-Asian hate moment of 2021,
Instead of actually addressing that, she said, no, let's just blame Black people and hire more police and get more surveillance.
Right.
And so let's look back on what happened, right? San Francisco had an opportunity. I wrote a resolution. San Francisco had an opportunity to implement ethnic studies and teach kids to respect the histories of every child in the room, including Asian American studies, right? Nobody's done anything about that. They don't care about that. I've talked about the fact that we need to teach kids about racism, so they use language that's not hurtful to each other, not just anti-Black, but anti-immigrant racism, which affects Asian American kids, right? Didn't do anything about that. They don't care about that, right? But what we have done in San Francisco is hire more police and, reduce oversight for police and get more surveillance. So what we see is a political narrative. Like, we have a real problem, which is Asian American elders were getting harmed. People were scared, right? And people were demonizing Asian Americans for the COVID pandemic. Sure. They took it and it's like any good that could have come out of it. It
was, I know, it's a bummer. It's like, it was instrumentalized toward organizations like the Manhattan Institute, Hoover Institution at Stanford is another one.
Yeah.
The, and the Heritage Foundation, like these types of groups, as we've talked about here on the podcast a couple of times, we'll also link to those in the show notes. How Asian American or anti-Asian hate was so quickly consumed by these groups that have the most conservative policies in mind, the most, I guess, very right-wing libertarian. I think, like Elon Musk is in the mix with a lot of these people, as you mentioned, Koch brothers. And I think people say like, oh, this is a culture war to kind of demean it. I think it, that has become a word embedded with, I don't know, like some kind of meaning that is supposed to say that it's sort of less than, and we shouldn't be so concerned about it. But it is to target the schools and to target things like everything from the schools to how police are have oversight or lack thereof. Like these are policies that are having real effects on people's lives, whether or not you want to call it a culture war. It's also an economic one. It is a policy one. It's a political one. These are very, very, again, going to use the word like deliberate ways that they are choosing to use race and racism and people's ideas around class and in the service of a very right-wing project.
Yeah. And so that's why I always say is like, we can't just stop with, people say, oh, that's racist or whatever. Well, I'm always asking, what is the function of this? What is this? Because if it's being produced and echoed and amplified, there's a rationale that they're utilizing and they're trying to achieve a goal. And Isaac Kamala, who is one of the first people who told me about the right-wing media ecosystem. I've learned to say that, and I think more people should talk about it. It's an ecosystem. And as a journalist, how social media, traditional media, politicians, and these think tanks, they all there's an ecosystem, they feed each other, right?
Sure.
And once you see it, you can't not see it, right? So he's the one that told me about this. And he said, Chris Rufo came up with a political weapon, right? That is really good language. That's why I love being an English teacher. When you have that language, then you can go around and see like the word welfare queen, right? That was a political weapon, right? That you could lob it at somebody, you could talk about it, and you could achieve a political end, right? And so instead of just saying, oh, well, that's racist, is really looking at what is this achieving? And I have another friend, Shireen Mitchell, who everyone should follow. She's Digital Sista on all platforms. She's a Black woman who does research on disinformation, specifically on social media, but political disinformation. And she's always said, number one, disinformation is always racialized, which never really hit me, but it's true. Usually race is utilized because we react. We are all triggered. And we can do things without even realizing we're reacting. Number two, though, is she said that it's achieving a purpose. And one time, I shared something where I was getting attacked, and she said, hold on, kind of calm down. What is going on here? And what we realized was they're constantly trying to get us divided. And so they will try to get Asians and Blacks, to fight. Yeah. They started trying to accuse Black people of anti-Semitism. They're also now we're seeing stuff on social media. There's TikTok, people are talking about how Palestinians supposedly are getting mad at Black people when there's never been conflict between the Black and Palestinian communities. Yeah. They're trying to start fights.
Absolutely.
And that's the purpose, because if we're fighting each other, or even between progressive Democrats and moderate Democrats, they'll try to start fights, right? Because if they can get us fighting, then we're not paying attention to what
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of sums it up pretty well. I hope that we were able to give people a taste of how the words on the pages, the 900 pages of Project 2025, that is something that has already been put into action in places like San Francisco. And the important thing is continuing to share this information
to that end, yeah, how can people follow your work?
Well, I have a podcast too, which I'm hoping you'll be on.
Yes.
My focus is on kind of what we've been talking about, but specifically this idea of education as a battleground. And most of us, even if we don't have children or we don't currently have kids in public school, most people, as you said, value public education. They value an educated citizenry, and they see education and public schools as a democratizing force in our country, right? If everyone is educated, then technically we should have, all of us should have more opportunities, to live, get the American dream, which everyone says we all want everybody to have the American dream, right? You can't have that if you don't have a good education. And so we talk a lot about, I interview some of the people that have helped me understand these systems. So people who do disinformation, political disinformation, people who do research in education, political researchers, and also DEI educators, right, who are on the ground. They're doing the work, right? And they're targets of these attacks. And ultimately, what we're trying to figure out is what are, like you said, what are the actionable things that people can do and in their neighborhoods? And I would say, definitely, mutual aid is a really important thing. Electoral politics is also important. And I know it's really complex right now. Things, a lot of people are feeling a lot of different ways, but being involved at a local level has huge impacts. I think if Steve Bannon knows that, I think progressive people also need to know that. And whoever's running for president, I can vote, we should be involved in pushing whoever leads us to be more just, right? But at a local level, we have people being targeted at school boards or people who are courageous enough to run. And there are kids that are showing up, like in Chino Valley, there are kids showing up, trans kids speaking up for their rights that are being attacked. And they need just regular folks to show up and stand by them and protect our kids, because ultimately these are political battles that are happening, but they're, like you said, they're having real impacts on children in schools and making schools unsafe for kids that come from historically marginalized backgrounds. Trans kids, LGBTQ kids, Black kids are experiencing more and more hate speech. There's a lot of xenophobia now. Anti-Semitism is obviously, an issue. It's always been an issue, but all of these things are getting worse now because these political actors are, in stirring up this conflict, they end up kind of creating a mess. And so I'm on all platforms. TikTok, I do a lot of education, and I also have a Patreon. So if folks want to support my work, and I have a ton of research, I'm an educator. I'm always sharing articles, research, resources, and even connecting folks. I do a lot of off social media organizing still, connecting educators who are being targeted or parents on the ground who are fighting in Florida or Virginia, to the information that they need to fight more effectively.
Yeah, no, that's huge. We will definitely link to all of those things in the show notes. Thank you so much, Ali. And
thank you for your voice too. I really appreciate your content. I appreciate the fact that you're amplifying voices that are not traditionally amplified. And independent media also is a huge, we need people to get involved, right, politically. And we also need folks to support independent media and folks like you who are creating content, because there's a lot of information, as you said, that people don't have access to, and you're helping people to connect the dots.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco. I am Toshio Moronic, and my co-producer is Tofu Estolas. Patreon.com/SadFrancisco is where you can find our past episodes and transcripts, and it's also where you can help us out with a donation. And if you do, it comes with some benefits like getting the episodes a few days early, and our gratitude for allowing us to keep making this podcast, which we love to do. See you next time in Sad Francisco.